Hello, I'm Christina Brown, and this is Our Take on Arise TV, the show where I am so excited to share the stories related and of interest to women. And joining me today as guest host is Rupa Michaelanini. She is an attorney with extensive media and legal analysis experience, especially when it comes to high-profile court cases. And Rupa, there's a hugely high-profile court case underway right now in Florida. We're going to talk about the trial of George Zimmerman a little later, but I'm curious, because you've been covering cases for a while, I'm curious how the coverage of this particular case measures up to some of the other high-profile cases we've seen, whether it's O.J. Simpson, Michael Jackson, you name it.
Sure. Really, in many ways, similarly, but I would say that the controversy here is even greater than it was with Michael Jackson or O.J. Simpson. Michael Jackson and O.J. Simpson were celebrities, so you always had that aspect of it. But this is a matter that really gets to the crux of the common man, the common person. This is a child, an 18-year-old child, Trayvon Martin, who was gunned down, who was murdered, essentially, and we don't know what happened that night in that parking lot. We have a variety of witnesses. With O.J. Simpson, we didn't have witnesses. We had two dead people.
Yeah, and also we also didn't have the same impact. Well, first of all, with O.J. Simpson, we didn't have social media. We didn't have Twitter. We didn't have Facebook. And we certainly didn't have the impact of social media on those cases that we are truly seeing with Trayvon Martin and the George Zimmerman trial.
We're getting opinion on social media. You're absolutely right. But I think that you, like myself, remember the day that O.J. Simpson was in that white Bronco.
That's true.
And that live feed of the car chase.
Yeah,
I mean, I was in Paris at the time, and it was live on CNN, I think.
Yes, and you certainly remember the video. You remember all of the live actions that were occurring. With this particular case. Obviously, we're not around to capture that kind of emotion and behavior, but what we are able to do is to evaluate all that's seen, all that's heard, and share those opinions with really anyone on Twitter, on Facebook, you name it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, which is why you really want to make sure that this jury is sequestered, and they don't have any access to these newspapers, to Twitter, to internet, to their Blackberries, because you know,
it's hard to escape.
Right, exactly.
And like I said, we'll talk a little further about the trial of George Zimmerman a little later. Thank you so much for coming back. You joined us last week during debut week, and you have a huge following. So so we bring you on back. All right, Rupa. Well, topping our daily take headlines today, President Obama is set to arrive in South Africa. However, not everyone is welcoming him with open arms. Hundreds of demonstrators marched in Pretoria today to protest against Barack Obama's visit to South Africa hours before he was due to arrive in Johannesburg. They're called the so-called Nobama Coalition, primarily made up of the South African Communist Party. President Obama's visit is part of a three-country trip. Now, the White House hopes it will actually compensate for what some view as years of neglect by the first black president of the United States. It is, however, unclear as to whether Obama will still visit Nelson Mandela, who remains hospitalized for a recurring lung infection. Meanwhile, Rupa, we were talking about this a little earlier. It seems odd to think, well, why wouldn't he visit former President Nelson Mandela? But of course, when you have the U.S. president, that's a major security detail. Sure. It would really change the energy, the mood in that area.
Right. I think that President Obama is probably thinking this is a private moment for the family, and he doesn't want to intrude. So he did say that he didn't say he's not going to visit, but he said that he'll assess the situation when he's on the ground.
Sure. And of course, the other question is, it would be considered proper to do so, to pay tribute, to take that time. However, you have to balance that, right, with the potential intrusion, as you said, that might cause the family and the staff of the hospital.
Absolutely, and as you'd mentioned earlier when we were talking, this presidential detail involved, the security, the advanced people, everything that's involved in that would just be possibly quite disruptive to the situation.
But like everyone, we're all watching and waiting and hoping that South Africa's former President Nelson Mandela is able to leave the hospital, and certainly with all the well wishes and prayers coming in, that is what we are all hoping for. Well, First Lady Michelle Obama did find herself with a warm welcome. This while she was in Senegal. She visited an all-girls school named in honor of Dr. Martin Luther King, where she inspired young girls to excel in all they do. Let's listen in.
So I know that it can take real courage to pursue your dreams, to come to this school, to pour yourself into your education, to envision possibilities for yourselves that no one could ever imagine. But don't ever forget that by investing in your education, you are doing the very best thing you can do, not just for yourselves, but for your children and your grandchildren. And you're also doing the very best thing that you can do for your country. That's true here in Senegal and in the United States and across the globe.
And hundreds of students warmly welcomed Michelle Obama with the high school's choir singing the American as well as Senegalese anthems. And what a beautiful sight and experience that must have been for the First Lady.
Amazing experience, and she's just such an inspirational character to young women all over.
Yeah. And we've seen the First Lady on these overseas trips take the time out of her schedule to speak particularly to young women. Yes. and inspire them to pursue their education, because as she said, that's a path to success.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Well, as we were talking earlier, Rupa, about the George Zimmerman trial, of course, today testimony is continuing. This first week, however, has revealed a lot about the night Trayvon Martin was shot and killed by the volunteer neighborhood watchman. Some 15 witnesses have now taken the stand this week. Judge Deborah Nelson allowed into evidence contentious 911 tapes, the non-emergency calls that George Zimmerman repeatedly made to police in the months leading up to the February 2012 death of Martin. Prosecutors argue that the tapes showed Zimmerman's mindset and ruthless, repeated profiling attempts. The jury also heard from mystery witness Rachel Jantel, the 19-year-old who prosecutors called their star witness. Rachel was on the phone with Trayvon minutes before he was killed. There was so much that we heard and saw in this first week of testimony. We hear, first of all, George Zimmerman's voice on the 911 recordings, and in many ways we hear the voice of Trayvon through witness number 8, or right. Rachel Jantel.
Right. Well, what we're seeing this week is a real attempt by the defense to discredit Rachel Jantel. Essentially, there are two things that they are saying that discredit her. And I think we need to look at this very carefully, because they're trying to portray her as someone who is inconsistent in her factual representations, and therefore she likely lied or exaggerated what she saw that night and what she later reported. Now, ultimately what they're using is her lie when she said that she didn't go to Trayvon Martin's funeral or wake because she wasn't feeling well and had gone to the hospital. We later found out that that was a lie. She has admitted that. But the poor girl saw her boyfriend, or not saw, but heard her boyfriend murdered.
I think it's important to point out that, in talking about why she lied, right, she said she didn't want to see his dead body. And I don't think anyone should necessarily be shocked by that. It seems like that would be a very kind of natural thing. That imagine you were on the phone with someone moments before he was shot and killed. I don't know of anyone who would necessarily be in a rush to now see his body. I think that would be a very traumatic experience. Nevertheless, it is a lie, and it is a lie that defense attorneys can exploit. But you talked about two things. So.
Right. The second thing that comes up is the fact that she'd written a letter with a recollection of the facts of that night. And she now states in testimony that she did not write that letter, actually, or that she had somebody else write it.
But she dictated the letter.
She dictated it, precisely. And she also was unable to read it out loud because she doesn't read cursive. So again, they're making an attempt to really just poke holes in her credibility.
And that letter, I think what the defense is using to their advantage, at least as much as possible, is the fact that in that letter, she doesn't actually make reference to it being a confrontation that stemmed from race. Right. She left certain things that she's saying under oath during testimony were things that were absent from the letter. But then again, she says, well, yes, this was a letter that was going to my friend's mother. There were certain things that, yes, I left out. It's painful enough. Right. But this is certainly a case that is not going away anytime soon. This is just the first week of testimony, and so there will be a lot more heard and a lot more to evaluate. Yes. Well, we are on Facebook, and we are also on Twitter, so I'm asking you to follow us on Twitter at Our Take Arise TV, and remember to like and leave comments on our Facebook page at Our Take on Arise TV. And you are watching Our Take.
Bigger, stronger, and more domineering than any other. Elephants are the centers of the animal kingdom, but unfortunately today, they're under attack. Tens of thousands are being killed each year just for their ivory. So please support conservation and never buy products made from ivory, because when the buying stops, the killing can too.
I wonder why anyone would do that to themselves. We all need air to breathe, to live, and so does the earth. But we're choking it with plastic bags. Let's stop using plastic bags and give the earth a chance to breathe. Refuse, reduce, reuse, recycle. Excuse me.
The World Health Organization recently released some startling findings in a new study. 35% of women from around the world have been raped or physically abused. At least 80% of the time, this violence is at the hands of a partner or spouse. Joining me today here in New York is Patrice Queen, a survivor of domestic violence, and with me from Washington, D.C., is Paulette Sullivan-Moore, Vice President of Public Policy, National Network to End Domestic Violence. And Paulette, I actually want to start with you. These figures are truly eye-opening. The World Health Organization analyzed data from 141 studies in 81 countries. Do you know where the U.S. stands? Are we leading the globe in fighting this problem?
The United States is right up front in fighting this problem, and it needs to be. 1 in 3 women in the United States is a victim of domestic violence during the course of her lifetime, 1 in 3 to 1 in 4. Those are high numbers. So we are doing great work. We've passed the Violence Against Women Act. The president was able to sign that into law in April. We are now working very hard to pass some reasonable gun control measures, because what we know is that 1/3 of all of the women who are killed each year in this country are killed by someone who is supposed to love them, a partner or former partner, and that a substantial number of 2/3 of the women who are murdered by their partner are murdered with a firearm. And so that's one of the pieces of legislation that issues that the United States is also leading on.
Paulette, you talk about the U.S. Leading the world in efforts to combat this, and you also mentioned Violence Against Women Act, VAWA. And I'm curious because in '94, when VAWA was first created, I understand that it created the first U.S. federal legislation just acknowledging domestic violence. Then with each reauthorization in 2000, in 2005, and in 2013, there have been more things added to VAWA. Is that an indication then that the violence is increasing, or simply awareness and people are coming out of the dark shadows seeking help?
I think it's a great indication of our awareness. For example, one of the things that happened with VAWA 2013 is that the tremendous violence against Native American women has been appropriately addressed in this VAWA for the first time. So as we see new tragedies and determine new ways to address those tragedies, we increase the depth of the bill and making certain that everyone gets protected by the Violence Against Women Act. We did the same thing this year in the VAWA 2013 with rights for lesbian and gay members of our community who are victims of domestic violence. We continue to understand that there is a need and attempt to meet that need.
Paulette, I have a question for you. You'd mentioned that there are policy gaps that exist. I'm wondering if you could go through some of where you see gaps going on in this policy and where women are falling through the cracks because of them.
Oh, here's a great example. We succeeded in getting VAWA passed, but we also know that one of the protections that our federal laws provide for us is that certain persons should not have access to guns, to weapons, to firearms. We know that felons should not have access, and we have a law that says that. We also know that people who commit misdemeanor acts of domestic violence should not have weapons, and our law says that. Or someone who has a protection order against them because they've been a domestic violence abuser should not have firearms. The dilemma is that 40% of the weapons that are sold in this country are sold either through private sale or internet sale. So that's 40% of the gun purchases in the United States that don't have to go through the background check. Wisconsin killing at the spa was a horrible example of what happens when that gap exists.
Sure.
And Patrice, I have to bring you into the conversation. You know, when we look at this, we see numbers, we see stats, but the reality is this was real for you. I understand that you are an advocate for survivors of domestic violence.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about your story and what happened to you and your children.
Could I answer about the gap first?
Sure, absolutely.
In New York? In New York, without gap, there's a gap between services. And right now, there's so much cutbacks in New York that women who are DV are being termed homeless after they leave the shelter. So they don't have the protections that the DV priority would give them because the DV priority is not there at all. And so there is a total disconnect between policies and what really happens with women.
At what point do they have to leave the shelter, or they are at some point leave the shelter, go to a proper home, and then they are no longer followed after and taken?
Well, we have a problem with housing in New York, and so there's not sufficient housing. So in New York, we 190 days is the stay that they have within shelter, and then they become homeless.
And 190 days is not a lot of time to try and rebuild your life. And you know this all too well.
Yes.
You struggled with this for quite some time.
Yes.
But at some point, you decided to leave. What finally got you there?
Well, leaving wasn't easy because I had several times that I dealt with domestic violence as a young person, and then in my marriage. And so leaving was not easy. However, one day, my husband, being a person of power and control, he asked for a divorce. And so at that point I said, if he could leave, I could leave. And so I said, oh, wait a minute, tell you what, 2 weeks, I'm gone, okay? And a week later, I was able to find a place. I did try being in the shelter, but I also had a job, and so that was rather difficult. And so to save money, I had to live in my car so I could have the money to go into an apartment. When in New York, when victims leave their batterer, they are required to leave their job, you know, and required to leave everything for safety reasons.
Sure, yeah.
For safety reasons. But because the resources are not connected to the survivor, then you get into the shelter, and almost immediately you need to get a job, you need to find resources for the children, so on and so forth. So there's a disconnect in most shelters about getting the services that you need.
Do you think that this is one of the deterrents for why women perhaps don't leave right away, leave their husbands?
Because there's no place for them to really
go.
It's a deterrent, but when you're finally ready to leave, it doesn't matter, the deterrent, and it doesn't matter that there's no housing. However, if you say that there is housing, then let there be housing.
Sure.
Okay? And let them have the support, because with the resources, you're able to heal. Without a connection to the resources, it's quite difficult to do it right. You just kind of have to hold yourself together and just move forward, and that's not the way to do it.
And Paulette, clearly we are hearing firsthand accounts of the repercussions of those policy gaps when it comes to how states and the nation really handles this. I'm curious, though, as to what the ramifications are culturally, though. This is not an issue that is only isolated to batterer and victim. It affects all of society. So how do you start to change the culture and dialogue that allows this kind of behavior to continue?
And just before I answer that question, can I agree with Patrice that there is absolutely a substantial gap between the needs that victims have and the services that we are able to provide. Our office works, the National Network to End Domestic Violence works very intently attempting to get Congress to pass a budget that is sufficient to pay for housing, to pay for services, to pay for programs, to address the needs of victims of domestic violence. We do a 24-hour snapshot every year, and we know that in the one day that we did the snapshot, 64,000 people across the United States received domestic violence services, but another 10,000 in that one day, 10,000 were turned away because there were not enough resources for the services. So I would agree with Patrice wholeheartedly. There are a number of shelter models and programs. There are some shelter programs that work pretty effectively in guiding survivors directly into transitional housing programs.
And I understand that, Paulette, but my question is, how do you change the culture that fosters an environment?
We have to. Yeah,
go ahead.
Yeah, we have to continue to punish people who are domestic violence offenders. We have to continue to instill in our children at very young ages what healthy dating relationships are. We have to have a society that values the human worth of every individual, so that if we teach our children and teach ourselves that every individual's life has value, every individual's self-identity has worth, that's when we will solve the problem. And that's what we have to keep working towards doing. That's why a lot of the programming involves what's called primary prevention. We're just attempting to address what's a good, healthy relationship between two human beings so that they complement and invigorate each other's lives rather than diminish each other's lives.
And Paulette, Patrice, I can see you were just waiting to respond. Thank you so much, Paulette, but I want to get Patrice a moment to also
There's a bad secret about domestic violence, and sometimes the victim is not always the woman or the man. Sometimes the victim is the child.
Yeah,
and in my case, as a young child, I was a victim of sexual violence within this circle. And that behavior made it difficult to know going forward how to push other things out of the way. And
to recognize that when you start at such a young age of being a victim of violence, it's hard to recognize when you mature that this is not the way I'm supposed to be treated.
And then if you have family members who are the perpetrators, like my father was my perpetrator, and as an adolescent would prostitute me, then it was even more difficult that when the person that I thought was a person that could help me to escape out of this dark place became the person that also would abuse me. And then it's like, well, maybe this is the best that it can get, you know?
Right. Well, I have to say thank you so much, Patrice, for joining us, for sharing your story and inspiring and showing others that there is a way out. And thank you, Paulette Sullivan-Moore. Certainly hope that you are able to get continued success there on Capitol Hill as you continue to fight for the rights of survivors of domestic violence. Thank you, ladies, both.
Thank you, Christina.
And you are watching Our Take.
Ndingululu Chumsila, mna ndingumama owasindayo kwi-cancer, i-cancer eyayisisibelekweni. Thina bantu, imistake yethu apha ikhoyo, kwawuthiwa umntu une-cancer, simjongela uba laa mntu ngomso uzosweleka. Andizange ndibe nabunzima kakhulu, ngoba into ebangela uba nditsho, eyam yabhaqwa msinyane, ngoba into enyanzelekileyo kuba ube nethemba xa kuthiwa unento. Isapoti endayifumanayo kumyeni wam, kubantwana bam, nefemeli yam yonke. Eyona nto ndandinayo mna entliziyweni yam kukuba okusalayo nam ndizophila ndifane nabanye abantu.
Lo myalezo niwuphathelwe yi-JSI and Livestrong Cancer Anti-Stigma Initiative.
I am Joseph Yobo. Having malaria as a top footballer can be a challenge to my career. This is why I make sure I and my family sleep inside treated nets to protect us from malaria.
My name is Victor Moses. My fellow mate, can you believe? One mosquito net of 1,200 only can save 33,600 naira in 1 year that you would have spent on mosquito sprays.
I am Vincent Nyama. Since my family started sleeping inside treated nets, we don't have to worry about malaria.
My name is Stephen Keshi. Malaria is a serious condition that can destroy the dream of becoming a football superstar.
This makes me a real man. What about you?
Yes, I am.
Yes, I am.
Yes, I am.
Come on, let's kick malaria out of Nigeria once and for all.
The Dark Girls documentary film is sparking conversations, and it sheds light on a taboo topic that many would prefer to keep hidden. Let's take a look.
I can remember being in the bathtub asking my mom to put bleach in the water so that my skin would be lighter and so that I could escape the feelings that I had about not being as beautiful, as acceptable, as lovable.
Throughout the film, women with darker skin share their personal stories of feeling inferior and being treated differently than those with a lighter complexion. Dr. Yaba Blay is co-director and assistant teaching professor of Africana Studies at Drexel University. She's joining me today via Skype. Her research focuses on Black identities and the politics of embodiment, with particular attention given to hair and skin color politics. She's also the author of the forthcoming book, One Drop, Shifting the Lens on Race. Thank you so much for joining me today, Dr. Yaba. Also with me is Tanya O'Neill, an inclusion and diversity consultant for a health insurance company. Dr. Yaba, let me speak with you first. What were your impressions of Dark Girls?
Many. I had several impressions of Dark Girls. I actually saw the film when it initially toured the country last year. And, you know, though my work also focuses on colorism, and though I know the importance of the conversation, I think for me, I was left feeling disappointed that the documentary didn't show a variety of quote-unquote dark girl experiences. And more than that, more so wanting more contextualization of the issues within racism and white supremacy.
I got to tell you, you've got heads nodding and shaking in the studio in agreement with Rupa and Tanya. Tanya, you're even rolling your eyes. Do I need to ask you what you thought of it? I think you just told me. What did you think?
Well, I have to be honest with you. First of all, I did not watch the entire documentary. I had seen it all day long, the previews of it coming on, and I started watching it, and then I just turned away because, you know, we've been having this conversation within the Black community for so long, and I'm so ready to move forward and say, okay, when are we going to have the conversation on what are we going to do about this? Okay, so when are we going to have the conversation to start working on teaching our young women that they are beautiful and teaching our males what true beauty is?
Well, clearly, to me, this documentary and just the reaction that the four of us ladies are having to this is an indication that the conversation does need to be had, that we do need to be talking about it. I understand, Yaba, that you actually wrote a piece for Clutch Online critiquing the documentary, and in part, correct me if I'm wrong, because of some of the responses you were getting on Facebook and Twitter. What happened there?
Right, and just to be clear, you know, I do believe the conversation is necessary, and so I don't critique Dark Girls for airing dirty laundry in the ways that other people have.
Sure.
I guess my largest critique is that we nuance the conversation because, as you say, we've been having this conversation for so long, and so how are we going to talk differently about it so that we can yield different results? But what I saw as I watched the documentary in real time with folks on Facebook and Twitter was combativeness, was the type of war that comes with any kind of framework that says light skin versus dark skin as opposed to light skin and dark skin. And so on the one hand, dark skinned women finally feeling affirmed that a particular story was being told about their experiences, and feeling some type of way, if you will, that folks were pushing back. On the other hand, light-skinned women feeling overlooked as if, you know, their stories weren't being told yet again. And just that kind of dialogue back and forth between the women is what I saw primarily. But then I also saw some men chiming in a way that is always makes me feel disrespected in the sense that a lot of men will come out and say, well, you know, this is so silly. Y'all just need to love yourselves, sisters. You know, we love all of you. Or you'll have the ones who say, well, it's just my preference. I just prefer light-skinned women.
Sure.
And so the dialogue just, you know, tends to become over-personalized, and it tends to go in circles. And so everyone leaves the conversation feeling like, see, why have this conversation anyway? We always end up being upset, so what's the point?
Right. Dr. Yaba, I completely hear what you're saying. I only saw a few clips of this film as well, and I felt the same. And I mean, it was a tearjerker in many ways to see these women and their pain and their suffering, particularly when they're children. Children are so impacted by their you know, your self-esteem is developed, you know, in your first 5 to 8 years of your life. So when you are dealing with this situation at such a young age, you know, you're scarred. I can see these women that are now so much older and talking about scrubbing their skin and you know, the feeling dirty and wanting to be in a bathtub with bleach. I mean,
you know, I went in preparing for this this segment. One of the things that came to mind, and Yaba and Tanya, please tell me, and Rupa, because you and I were having this conversation about how this colorism is also pervasive in the Indian community as well.
In many communities. It's
That's
not
true.
just the African American community. It's the Indian community. It's the Persian community. It's the Asian community. Chinese, Japanese. They hold umbrellas over themselves so that they can stay pale. I mean, that's huge in Japan and China.
What this brought very vivid memories to me, and it's interesting because clearly I had suppressed them. When I was younger, I remember that I discovered that when I fell and had a scar, you know, the skin first turns white.
Yes. Sure.
And I remember at one point, I was thinking about this last night, I couldn't have been more than 8 or 9 years old. It's like I see myself right now intentionally running and falling, hoping I could scar my skin so that it would be white.
Yeah.
You know, I did that. And that's what this film did for me. It dredged up some old memories that I preferred had remained dark and hidden.
Sure. And I think that was probably part of the reason why I could not watch the entire thing through, where I would flip back and forth, is because it did bring back a lot of memories for me. I grew up in a family that was very loving, but they did put a lot of emphasis on skin color.
Yeah.
And so I was the middle child. I was the only girl, and I was between two very fair-skinned brothers. And it's interesting because it depends, I think, also on what age group you're in, because my younger brother does not get it at all. He's like, what? We're all black. My older brother, though, I can remember, it's really funny that you say that about growing up, is because I can remember my mother when she would wash me in the bathtub and she would be scrubbing me, and my older brother would say, that's because she's trying to scrub all the black off of you.
Oh, boy. And at that time, when you heard that, did you recognize that as a painful thing, or did you just took it in? Do you recognize it as how that may have wounded you emotionally?
I think I recognized it as it was painful at the time, because it was like, oh, why don't I look like them? But, over time, as I got older and really just started thinking about who I am and coming into my own self, and it's like, you know what? This is me. This is how I was supposed to be, and I love who I am and the way I'm made. And I think I didn't want to go back there. So that's probably why I didn't watch the entire thing. And I wanted to, the other piece of it is, it's a relevant story. It is still happening today. But the other piece that's missing is, what are we doing about it? So that 40 years from now, we're not still looking at a little black girl saying, the darkest one is dirty and dumb.
But Yaba, the reality is colorism, right? We do see where, in some ways you might call it a self-fulfilling prophecy or reality. We do see where the color of your skin does translate into, whether you potentially get one job or you don't get another job, or maybe you're attractive to one person, but you're not attractive to another person. How do you move the conversation forward in a way that is truly inclusive?
Well, for me, I think, again, what often ends up happening in this conversation is that we point fingers at one another as if we do this to ourselves. This is the conversation that absolutely has to be contextualized within global white supremacy and racism. Like, this is something that is absolutely reflective of the ways in which the white ideal is projected as the ideal against which all other bodies are compared. And if you compare a black body to a white body, that black body is never going to come out on top. And so, for me, again, this notion of going back to dredge up old memories is not so much the issue for me, because for me, it's like, yes, I can connect to those stories as well. I've also had painful experiences growing up Ghanaian in New Orleans, and so made to feel very aware that I was dark-skinned. But from there to now, something happened, and what happened was me coming to understand that it wasn't me, an individual, and it wasn't even the people who were name calling. It wasn't them. It's that we have all been trained to see blackness in a particular way.
And that really is the true issue, is this collective thinking about ourselves and others. Well, Dr. Yaba Blay, thank you. Stay with us. Tanya, thank you. Okay. This is Our Take. We will be back. Keep it right here.
Basketball, it's a numbers game. But just listen to these numbers.
1 in 3 adults in this country are at risk of developing diabetes.
1 in 3.
Just think about what that looks like in here. Our families.
Our friends.
Our fans.
Let's change those numbers.
Learn your risk factors for diabetes.
Go to dribble2stopdiabetes.com and take the risk test.
It's fast, free, and easy.
Remember, your health depends on you. To learn more, go to dribble2stopdiabetes.com.
There's a lot of hidden dangers out there in cyberspace. Never put your personal information online unless you ask your parents and they say that it's fine. Before you log on, don't be hasty. Please be smart with online safety. Stop and think before your connection. Use these steps for your protection. Online safety.
Stop. Think.
Connect.
I wonder why anyone would do that to themselves. We all need air to breathe, to live, and so does the earth. But we're choking it with plastic bags. Let's stop using plastic bags and give the earth a chance to breathe. Refuse, reduce, reuse, recycle.
I came to Africa to see this.
But I also found this. Every year, thousands of elephants are being killed just for their tusk. If we buy ivory, we're just helping the poacher. So please, don't do it, because when the buying stops, the killing can too.
Today's Our Take guests are sharing their perspective on the controversial and provocative documentary Dark Girls, a film where Black women candidly share their struggles with self-esteem, beauty, and the color of their skin. Here's a clip.
I used to wish that I can wake up one day lighter or wash my face and think that it will change. I thought it was dirt and I tried to clean it off, but it wouldn't come off.
Here comes Blackie. Here comes Tar Baby. I remember one in particular, they used to say, "You stayed in the oven too long." And that was really hurtful.
Joining the conversation are Mia Johnson with me in New York and her mother, Renee Harrison Johnson, who joins us via Skype from Rhode Island. Mia, I'm sure you've been listening to the conversation. In hearing some of these ladies and children in this film talk about their memories in terms of how they were perceived by others based on the color of their skin. Does any of that remind you of things that you heard as a child?
See, for me, it's a very different experience. And I was always raised to believe I was beautiful from day one. My mother instilled that in me, my father instilled that in me, and so did all of the fabulous women that were around me. So it's heartbreaking to hear that is how someone can view themselves, and to want to sit in a bathtub full of bleach, to bleach your skin, to change how you look. I personally think my complexion is beautiful. My mom says it all the time. She's like, I sit in the sun to try to get your complexion. So it's something that I personally can't relate to, and find it even hard to hear that someone would want to change themselves so much, and that they feel that they are so inadequate because this is the color of their skin. I can't even.
You can't relate in that regard
at all.
And Renee, it sounds like you clearly went to great lengths to make sure that your daughter felt confident about herself on a number of different levels, including the issue of skin. Did you do that intentionally because you recognize, obviously, the world that we live in?
Absolutely not. I grew up in a Black neighborhood. My best friend was dark-skinned, and we were very proud of who we were. I mean, they called us names. My name, they used to call me white folks. They called her blue, and we used to think, that's their issue. You know, we were great. We just thought so much of ourselves. So it was so easy to teach my daughter to think so much of herself, because we just knew we were good. And, you know, growing up in Boston, racism was horrible. It was just, you know, the whites, the blacks, it was just, you know, you had to make a choice and decide what you thought of yourself. You couldn't go by what everyone else said. You know, you didn't want anyone to call you stupid, but it didn't matter what they called you about your looks, because you knew what you looked like. I wanted to be smart. I wanted to be well-spoken. What I looked like was my decision, not theirs.
And Tanya, that sounds like what you're hoping this conversation really becomes about, less about the color of the skin, but really what's going on inside.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I'm, you know, again, it is a relevant conversation. Obviously, we're looking at small children in 2013 who still feel this way, who are still experiencing this type of pain. And instead, we should be doing things like making sure that our kids know that it's a great thing to be smart and to be articulate and to walk with your head up and not be so focused on this covering of ourselves.
But it also comes from the home, it comes from the school, from education, it comes from our films, it comes from our fashion magazines, it comes from our television news, the faces that we're seeing that are reporting the news. What we need to feel is that this isn't, as Dr. Yaba had said in the earlier segment, this isn't about black versus white, brown versus black, brown versus white, yellow versus, it isn't a versus. Right. It's a, we are all that we are, and when you go to a store, you choose your red dress or your yellow dress or your brown dress. It doesn't matter. They're all wonderful colors.
And you talk about the impact of images, and I think for most of us, we can certainly remember when the model Iman hit the runways, and what that was to the fashion world, that you could have this tall, beautiful, dark African goddess, right, be the apple of major designers' eyes. There's some other ladies I want to bring our attention to. Grace Jones, Alex Weck, Naomi Campbell, Viola Davis, all beautiful, gorgeous women. But here's the thing that I find interesting, is when we are talking about the beauty of dark women, I often hear, what a beautiful black girl you are. Yes. What a beautiful black woman you are. Yet, when I hear the compliment being paid to someone who is of fair complexion, oh, you are a gorgeous woman. What a cute little girl you are. Doesn't that echo true for you?
Yes, I would definitely say that part. I can just say with my background, I went to predominantly white schools my entire life, from kindergarten all the way straight through college, predominantly white schools. But what it was never, my skin color never held me back in those situations. I became the token. I was the one on the catalogs, like, look, we do have black people at our school, swear, I promise. But what that did for me, it made me value my color even more. You know, yes, I was everyone's first black friend, and yes, I was the one who had the braids, and yes, everyone tried to touch my hair. It happened. It does. It happens. But on the same hand, it didn't do to me what it did, what it seems like in this documentary. It didn't make me feel inferior. It rather made me feel superior, to be honest.
And Renee, I'm curious as to whether or not race played a role in even just the choosing of Mia's father. She told us a story about how you used to say that you wish you could tan long enough so you could get dark like Mia. Did that make you more attracted to her dad?
When I said I wanted to tan, being brown is beautiful, you know, so when I tan, I think I look good. So when I married Mia's dad, he was fine.
Right on.
He was fine on a number of levels, right?
Fine, so thanks, Ma. I mean, you know, my colors, you know, my family, I have sisters lighter than me, sisters darker than me. Yep. You know, like I said, my best friend was dark, and there's so many of my friends who are, you know, dark divas. You know, they're not dark girls, they're dark divas. So the problem for me wasn't with black Americans, it was with white folks. Them accept me, hire me because I'm smart, hire me because I can do this job. You know, I remember thinking, when, you know, the older black women thought because I was light-skinned, I was special, I would think, God, I wish this white guy thought that so I could get this job. You know, to me, it wasn't something that was personal that was happening to me. Again, it was their issue, and I had to work my way around their issue, you know?
And Yaba, Dr. Yaba, do we still have you on the line?
Yes.
Okay. I like the point that Renee brought up, which is the fact that when it comes to getting a job, right? At the end of the day, black is black, whether you're light or dark or whatever. Can you talk a little bit about how this colorism that we are all dealing with within the community, how does that then translate outside the community who are looking at us as all just black?
They are, but there are also different types of black, in the sense of, if we understand white supremacy to construct a spectrum of sorts, with white at the top and black at the bottom, shades in between are valued according to their proximity to either white at the top or black at the bottom. And so it's about which black becomes more accessible, which black becomes more marketable, which black makes us more comfortable. And it's interesting, and just in terms of current events, you know, I have a colleague who makes a point, Dr. Brittany Cooper, about the ways in which the media is responding to the young woman, Rachel Jantel, who's testifying in the Trayvon Martin case. You know,
you bring up an excellent point. You're talking about Rachel Jantel, witness number 8, considered the prosecution's key witness in the George Zimmerman trial. And I'm glad you brought up that point, because in looking at Rachel Jantel, it certainly sparked a conversation internally. The conversation, you know, she's dark-skinned, she's heavy-set. There's a class issue that's also associated with the color of the skin as well.
Absolutely. And so that's that spectrum, right? Who do we associate? What side of the spectrum do we associate you with based upon the complexion of your skin? So the darker you are, the more likely you are to be devalued, right? The lighter you are, the more likely anything that we assign to whiteness, you'll get more of that than someone who's of a darker skin. So it makes sense then that if we look at news stations, if we look at other movies and videos, like which woman is cast as the beautiful love interest, or if we want to have a black woman play, I don't know, Nina Simone, we cast a lighter one.
Right, you're talking about the casting of Zoe Saldana, and you bring up a really great point again. I mean, there was a lot of people when it came to the group Destiny's Child who felt as though the success that Beyonce saw versus the success that, say, Kelly Rowland saw was tied to their complexions.
Could be. Could be. You know,
I'm hearing,
You know, I have a point.
And then I want to jump in.
I have a point I'd like to make on this. I think that the times have changed. Absolutely, when we talk about this classism versus colorism, certainly the two were tied way back when in history, and we've seen an evolution through time. But now we've got the President of the United States who's black. I think that's pretty much says it all right there. Don't you think? I mean, that's pretty much in terms of class, pretty much the highest class you could get and the highest power, you know, that you could be. And he's a black man. So
a black man with a white mother.
Right.
Right. But again,
someone said amen.
But that's part of the
We're talking about color. We're talking about
and here's,
spectrum of
I
color.
just wanted to get back to what Mia said. Is I love what she said. Is that, you know what, she used it to her advantage to be the only one. And when I think about that, that's really what happened to me too. Is that you know, okay, so if I'm not going to be the prettiest, I am going to be the smartest. I am going to be articulate. I am going to stand out, and I'm going to make sure that people know that I am qualified to be here and to do these things. And so that's what it did for me. And so, yes, you know, there were some painful things, but you know what? Some good stuff came out of that, too.
All right. Well, ladies, this is a conversation that could seriously, obviously, could continue. So clearly, Dark Girls certainly made an impact in that regard, because we're definitely talking about it. Dr. Yaba Blay, thank you for joining us via Skype, as well as Renee Harrison Johnson and your daughter Mia and Tanya O'Neill. And thank you, Rupa Michelinini, whose last name I love saying, Michelinini. Thank you for joining me as guest host. Ladies, I think we all make a very beautiful array of shades of brown and black. I am watching, or rather, I am Christina Brown, and you are watching Our Take.
Ndingululu Chumsila, mna ndingumama owasindayo kwi-cancer, i-cancer eyayisesibelekweni. Thina bantu, imistake yethu apha ikhoyo, kwawuthiwa umntu une-cancer, simjongela uba laa mntu ngomso uzosweleka. Andizange ndibe nabunzima kakhulu, ngoba into ebangela uba nditsho, eyam yabhaqwa msinyane, ngoba into enyanzelekileyo kuba ube nethemba xa kuthiwa unento. Isapoti endayifumanayo kumyeni wam, kubantwana bam, nefemeli yam yonke. Eyona nto ndandinayo mna entliziyweni yam kukuba okusalayo nam ndizophila ndifane nabanye abantu.
Lo myalezo niwuphathelwe yi-JSI and Livestrong Cancer Anti-Stigma Initiative.
It is now time to go from our take to your take. We want to hear from you and see what you've been up to online. So here is what our Twitter friends have been tweeting. Miss Kelly P says, fantastic time today. Thanks so much for having us. And that is, of course, Kelly Pierre, who joined us yesterday for our Intrepid Women Travel segment. Hamilton Hayes writes via Twitter, great advice from Evita Robinson about oregano oil. Evita Robinson was also one of our guests yesterday on the travel segment. She was actually giving advice on when traveling to India. If you have some digestive issues, just take a teaspoon or so of oregano oil. She does warn, however, it stinks like crazy. Plus, CCF says, I love the whole show. I'm definitely starting my travel fun. Going all around the world is my dream. Note to self, clearly, we're going to have to continue with the travel segments. We're getting a lot of people enjoying our travel segments. And Serafina R tweets us and says, love seeing women in travel, and she really likes Evita Robinson sharing the fearlessness of taking this world by storms. Well, of course, I have to say thank you for joining me on Our Take. We had a really interesting conversation today, not only about domestic violence, its impact on survivors, their family, and cultures at large, but also a great conversation about the shades of black and brown and what makes us feel and be beautiful. So I want to hear your comments about today's show. You can find me online on Facebook and Twitter. Be a part of our show and tell us what you think. You can like us on Facebook, and of course, obviously, you can send us a tweet, and guess what? You might get your tweet read live on the air. Well, in today's Our World video segment, we say, forget about Miley Cyrus's hot twerking moves in the clubs. We have found a South African vendor on YouTube who is literally pulling the strings to get his lifelike kid puppets twerking in the streets. Let's take a look. Shake it, I like it. That video coming to us from South Africa. Thank you for watching Arise Our Take. I'll see you online and see you again on Monday. Have a great weekend.